Hey everyone, this is John Sinclair. I'm happy to be part of the Greg Bennett Show. If you have any questions for me,
Welcome to the Greg Bennett Show, presented by Any Question. I'm your host, Greg Bennett, and I have just concluded a wonderful conversation with Mr. John Sinclair, a world-renowned strength and conditioning coach, somebody that is trained in areas of cognitive behavioral therapy, plus areas like massage and athletic training, and obviously a strength and conditioning specialist. And one of the quotes that I loved in here, he said, my job is to engineer another human being's performance. And it really is, for him, understanding the behavior of this person, what makes them tick, as much as it is training them on specific skills. And for me personally, that really hit a chord in the sense of understanding why somebody is there to learn and become better, and how would they like to be taught. And so we have a really wonderful conversation about how the mind and body operate together, and both whether you're starting with the mind and then looking at the body, or looking at the body and then how that affects the mind. But it's an area that I thoroughly enjoy, and there's so much learnings in this one. I think you're going to thoroughly enjoy the storytelling from John and his background, being a Canadian hockey player and then finding his way into the world of strength and conditioning. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. And if you have follow-up questions, John has been absolutely a rock star on the Any Question app. He has over 500 answers there already, and all of them are such high quality. Honestly, you could spend as much time on there as you need to just listen to John and his answers to over 500 questions right now. But if you do have follow-up questions from this podcast, as I'm sure many of you will, just go on there, ask him a question. You'll be notified when John answers it. He answers all of these questions. He's very good at getting back to people. So please use the app to follow up with anything that you want to ask John, and learn more from John on the app. He really is an outstanding human being, and I was very privileged to have him on the show. Until next time, remember, success comes to those who endure just one moment longer. All right, today I am joined by one of the greatest strength and conditioning coaches in the world. He has been coaching and programming athlete development for almost 25 years, and his experience in coaching athletes through long-term development into college and professional sports allows for unique and creative human engineering and programming strategies for performance and health outcomes. He's been coaching champions in all levels of sport, from amateur to professional and the Olympics. And he has a health and performance coaching company called Authentic Health Coaching, and you can go to AuthenticHealthCoaching.com and get all his information there. It's an absolutely fabulous website, and you can connect with him there. He's also the co-founder and vice president of health and performance for 7 Movements Health, and is the wellness consultant for the Ritz Carlton Yacht Collection. As the programming director for the Institute of Motion, he educates coaches worldwide and consults with the largest companies in the health, performance, sport, and fitness industries. And finally, his content on the Any Question platform is simply brilliant. I've just learned so much from watching his content. Almost 500 answers. I think you're at 499 answers actually, and all of it is just absolutely fabulous. So it's an honor and a privilege to have him join me today. So welcome, and thanks for joining me on the Greg Bennett Show, John Sinclair. How are you, mate?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I actually just finished my 500th one right before we got on here.
Okay.
And it was the question about what would be my vision if I was the CEO of Any Question. So I saved that one for number 500.
What was it? I haven't had a chance to look at it. What is your vision if you were the CEO of Any Question? What was your answer?
Well, I think information is really valuable, and when experts share their knowledge, that's great. But I think my long-term vision would be is how can we take that and turn it into something practical? Right? So how do we organize all that information? So in the strength world, it would be, and I'll look at it through that purview as an example, but we would take the information that we're providing and maybe create programs for people that they could access.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's all on the roadmap. We have a lot of things on the backside that we want to do for everybody that's, involved, whether that's webinars or courses. One of the things I got excited about, and I was talking to another strength coach, Matt Pendola. I don't know, I think you've met Matt on some of the calls, and there's quite a great strength community we've built up in Any Question, and you all are connecting with each other. And he's rebooting his podcast on his own. He's probably going to reach out to a number of you to have these conversations. But what we want to build also in Any Question is that ability to have each of you, if you want to, sort of have a webinar, or maybe 2, 3, or 4 of you, and ask each other questions that can be recorded live. And then we can also, have that post recording that people can watch as well. But there's something about experts interviewing experts that is very digestible for anybody. And as part of I think the reason my podcast became reasonably successful is my background as a professional athlete, and I was able to have conversations with other, people like yourself, coaches and athletes and doctors and sports scientists, is there's this common link that you're able to share stories. So that's all in the future. We're looking forward to building all of that out. But honestly, mate, like I said in the intro, it's just fabulous to have you on the platform. You've been one of the driving forces and one of the founding experts, and it's been a real pleasure just to get to know you through the app. So thanks for all you've been doing. Oh,
thank you. That was a wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me on the app. This has been, I said right at the onset that I have never been a real big fan of social media, and the reason for it is that we don't really use it to share best practices. And this kind of gives us an opportunity to have an authentic response through our own perspective of that question. I think that's what's really valuable. I think, media really does a disservice to practitioners in their kind of genre, or in their main expertise, in that we're always searching for what's the one best thing for this. And while those are fun sound bites, we lose a lot of context. So I think the ability for, other experts to share best practices and give different perspectives on a question just creates more value for the end user. And I think that's what we've been missing. We're kind of stuck in the days of not to pick on this magazine, but like a Men's Fitness thing where they'll give you the top 3 things you're going to do for your chest, or, and then what it does for the strength community is that it minimizes the effectiveness of what our profession is when we start looking for the best of this and the best of that. And, from Matt or Aaron or myself or Paul or any of the other experts that are on here, while we're in the same profession, we all have very unique experiences within that, right? So I've done, I think the last time I did the math, I was over 150,000 hours of personal coaching, and there's no way anyone in the world has had those exact same experiences as I have, right? And vice versa. And so I think that is an amazing opportunity. If we can share those best practices and learn from one another, I think just elevates our profession.
Well said. And I just want to nail the one thing earlier that you said, it's an authentic place. It's a place where, one of the things that was drawn to when I was talking with Ed early on about building this platform was, I never felt comfortable promoting myself on the Instagram and the Twitter and Facebook and these days TikTok, but it was like, it always felt forced. I always felt like, what am I going to promote today? What product am I promoting? How am I promoting myself? And it always felt forced and never felt comfortable. But the idea of say, hey, somebody's come and asked me a question. The other day I was asked, I think, why or how did you start your podcast? It was a very specific kind of question. And it was like, yeah, I pick it up and I can talk about the why and how of I started a podcast, right? And I think I'm just picking up the phone, recording myself as a selfie and talking to the individual that asked, but everybody can hear it. And it's less promotion and salesy, and it's just simply me being my authentic self, right? And I think that's when you guys can show your knowledge, like you said, you're all so different, even though you're under the same umbrella of strength and conditioning coaching or however you want to call it, you're all coming from it from a different angle. Your background, and we'll get into it, coming from Canada and hockey being the big sport. And I've learned to say hockey rather than ice hockey. I got reprimanded the other day by a professional. I don't know if you know the guy. Do you know Brad Richards? Who plays ice hockey?
Of course.
Plays ice hockey. See, he's a mate of mine up at the club here. And
amazing.
And I'm like, I was introducing him to somebody. I was like, oh, yeah, Brad plays ice hockey. He's like, Greg, we don't say ice. We just say hockey. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I'm sorry, mate. So what I love about that is like your background is going to be very, very different. And I think we're seeing that with the different personalities on Any Question. But, mate, where are you? Where are you in the world? When we say you're Canada, where are you located at the moment?
Well, I'm actually live in Sunrise, Florida now. So I moved down here 9 years ago.
You're only an hour or so south of me.
That's right.
That's brilliant, mate. Well, I've been excited about doing this recording with you ever since I think our first conversation when I think you were on one of the Strength Channel calls. And you've just been so wonderful in giving us, as a company, feedback and advice and creating content, obviously. But let's step into this and tell me, who are some of the college athletes and professional athletes you've worked with, and who have been some of the sports that you've done a lot of your focus on in the last 25 years? Yeah,
when I first got into the strength and conditioning world, it was, I guess the easiest way to explain it was I needed to feed myself. And so I was volunteering at the time. I just got my undergrad degree in physical education and sport performance. And the track that I was on in athletic therapy. Mm-hmm. I kind of retired from playing junior hockey at the time. And I was like, well, maybe I should I'm not going to be a pro hockey player. I'm not going to play high level of university at the University of Alberta, which was my dream, was to play at the best program in the world. And I never made the team. But I thought, you know what, maybe I'll make it as the athletic trainer. And so at least then I can be part of the team. I'll have kind of checked the box on what one of my dreams was, albeit in a different capacity. And I, got the opportunity to be mentored under Pete Friesen, who was, I think he was the strength coach for the Carolina Hurricanes for like 20 years. And before that, he was at the University of Alberta, where I got my degree. And I got mentored under him and another fellow by the name of Todd Richardson. And I became, like the kid that sharpens skates and learns about all the athletic injuries and helps the guys with any of their rehab. And it was really like the second athletic therapist on that team. And I was there to really learn. And then what ended up happening was I got an opportunity to work at a physical therapy clinic under another mentor of mine, and his name was Steve Silver, and he was the president of the Canadian Physical Therapy Association at the time. What was cool about that experience was that I got to learn a lot about the sport side of athletic therapy, but also the clinical side of physical therapy. And what ended up happening was I ended up not having a job at the physical therapy clinic anymore. Steve moved on, and then I was like, well, I was kind of his guy, and I was like, well, they're not really paying me a lot for the amount of time I'm in. Maybe I should start doing some strength and conditioning. And so I started working with kids that I knew at the University of Alberta. So guys that were still playing hockey that I used to play with, and I kind of got started there. And then I went on to start working in junior hockey as the athletic trainer / strength and conditioning specialist. So I was doing all the injury stuff, the rehab, but also the strength and conditioning. So I kind of had a 2-part role with this one team, and it basically led me to taking that team to a local gym that was there. And then that the lady that owned and operated the gym was like, well, you seem to be here a lot, and I don't really want to be operating the gym. Would you operate it for me? And I was like, yeah, sure. That sounds cool. And so I started doing that. And then we had a coaching change on that hockey team. I think I did it for about 1.5 years or 2 years. And then we had a coaching change on the team. He wanted to bring in his athletic trainer. So I lost my job, and I was driving back and forth to this town without any real reason because I wasn't with the hockey team. So I applied for an ad for another gym in Edmonton. It was called World Health, and World Health was expanding into Edmonton from Calgary. And so I went in, answered this little ad, met one of my very good friends, Jeff Thirsk, who was the general manager at the time, and we became very good friends. I met him for the first time, and I said, hey, I'm a coach. He's like, well, why don't you bring some of your athletes in, hang out, and then eventually when we find, we're going to build out a personal training program, we could hire you. I was like, yeah, sounds great. It's only 5 minutes from my house. I'll do that. And to make a long story even longer, I spent the next 13 years with World Health developing their personal training program, educating their coaches. We developed an entire educational system that had, all our levels of credentials were anchored into our pay structures, our bonus structures. I was there for 13 years, and it was one of the best experiences that I've had in this profession, because that I was given control to make a lot of mistakes and for us to evolve. And I look back now, and the leadership that we had there was fantastic. Having had that position, I started to get a bit of a reputation in the city, maybe that, John's the person you go and speak to, and he can, answer some of your questions. And then that led us to becoming big sponsors for some of the local sports teams. And so I got involved with working with the Edmonton Oilers organization during the lockout year when they were, the NHL had a strike. And their farm team, or their American Hockey League team, was in Toronto. And so I spent the year before kind of working with the guys through my good friend Chris Davey, who's one of the athletic therapists with the Oilers still to this day. And so I really kind of got started with at the pro level with the Edmonton Oilers organization. And then that kind of spun into some other opportunities. I started working with the Edmonton Rush Professional Lacrosse League and their professional lacrosse team, the Edmonton Rush. And then that kind of spun into getting to meet, folks all over. So I got to work with some of the athletes for the Canadian national wheelchair basketball team, which was a really cool experience because I had never worked in Olympics or Paralympics at that point, and B, you're working with like some of the most amazing athletes on the planet as Paralympians, and just seeing the level of control and expertise that they had with the wheelchair, like just how they made the wheelchair part of their body was just something that was truly remarkable. And so that kind of spawned into starting to do more things privately. So working with private hockey, like hockey players in the off season, I got an opportunity to work to move down to South Florida. I got recruited to work at a company called Midtown Athletic Club. I was recruited as the fitness director there. So my wife and I decided, well, hey, we should, if we were ever going to get an opportunity to move to Florida, this might be it. I think the winter before, it was just horrendous. It was so cold. And I was like, do we want to keep doing this? Like, things are going really well. Like I had nothing really to complain about. And, Midtown Athletic Club, recruited me, and they really wanted me as part of it. And in fact, it was Scott Hobson, who was on our strength channel, that recruited me. And he recruited a bunch of us from, I was working as a faculty for a company called PTA Global, which was an education company. So while I was working in Edmonton, we were building a new certification called PTA Global that was started by like 22 of the world's top experts in education in strength and conditioning and personal training. And they built this education platform out, and Scott was one of the co-founders of it. He recruited me down there, and that opened up a completely different world, because the world of professional sports and private sport training down here, and even amateur training down here, is so much bigger than in Canada. And so that got me into tennis a little bit.
Yeah, tennis. Yeah, I was going to say it's very different sports.
Yeah, huge, because I'd never played tennis before, and now I'm working at a tennis facility and helping strength and conditioning for that. And then, being exposed to so many great tennis players down here, and golfers and baseball players. And so I got to start working with some professional baseball players. And so, we expanded from Midtown. I was only there for about 2 years, and I decided to leave and start my own place with another fella down here by the name of Andy Hanley. And he was just leaving his previous gym he was working at, and we had a conversation. We're like, let's start a facility. And so we built a cooperative facility for coaches and personal trainers to come to and just run their business out of our facility. And that was kind of like, that was really when I started tapping into amateur sport. Is I didn't have a lot of clients when I left Midtown, and I needed a way to kind of get going in the amateur world. And Andy was gracious enough to say, well, you've got a background in athletic therapy. All these kids are always coming in hurt because they're playing one sport all the time. Could you help me with my clients? And so what ended up happening was I kind of took the role of movement therapy and exercise medicine and started applying that into our programming of what we were doing for his clients. And then I just started getting referrals from that. And then I built built my business back up again. So I had to kind of start from scratch like 4 different times in my career.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing that journey because I want to go back to almost one of the first things you said, and this is just for my own interest, to be honest. When you kind of had that passion and that mindset that you wanted to have a professional career as a hockey player, was that a hard transition to give that up and focus more on the, athletic training and strength and conditioning side of things? Or was that a natural fit for you? And then when you did make that transition, so there's 2 parts to this question, did you feel like that was an area that you did have kind of a natural affinity towards? You had some talent?
My recollection and memory of it happening was when I got cut during the tryouts. I was a walk-on, they had open tryouts for the team. Mm-hmm. The team at the University of Alberta Golden Bears hockey team, and they were one of the deepest teams that you could get. Like, I mean, they were always vying for a national championship. They had, more national championships than anyone else in the world, and they just had incredible amount of depth. And I was playing junior at the time, and I think the first year I got cut from them, it made sense. Like, I didn't play all that well, and then I had a good junior year, and then I came back the next summer to try out, or late summer, early fall. And I went out there and I played unreal, like absolutely unreal, the best hockey I'd ever played. And even like some of the guys that were on my team in junior that were also trying out were like, John, I think you're going to move on. And I was like all excited, and I was one of the first cut. Oh, and so I sat there in that room when they were cutting me, and I'm like, what? Is this it for me? Like, I just gave you my best, and you just like right off the bat didn't even move me to the next step, And right then in that room, I said, look, it's obvious that you guys aren't going to have me as part of your program, but I really want to be a part of your program. Mm-hmm. Is there a chance that I could come back 1 year? I'm studying athletic therapy. Is there a chance that I could come back and learn from you guys as coaches and have an opportunity to be an athletic trainer on this? I want to get started. Who do you know right now that is looking for an athletic trainer in hockey anywhere in Alberta? And the assistant coach, Eric Thurston, says to me, he goes, I think I know someone. I'm going to call them. I'll let them know about you, John. Hopefully you'll hear back. So about 2 days go by, and I get the call from the owner of a junior hockey team. And he says, hey, I got your name from Eric Thurston. We're looking for an athletic therapist. He highly recommended you. Would you want to come in for an interview? And I got that job. And then the year after that, I got the opportunity to be with the University of Alberta. So I think at the time, Greg, it was tough because I knew I was playing so well that I didn't make that team, but I also had the opportunity to go back to junior hockey knowing that I had making a big step in my game, and I chose not to. But I was kind of excited about this next opportunity. Yeah. But looking back, I think, man, what would have happened if I would have played 1 or 2 more years, And, because I left kind of at the top of my game, not at the bottom of my game.
I get it.
And as we get older, you start to evolve, right? So I was only probably 19 at that time. So I still had a lot of hockey left in me. Mm-hmm. And, as you get older and wiser and get used to the pace of the game, you start playing a little better, and then other opportunities come. And so I think, that was, mid 1990 when that was going on. And so I sometimes look back on it and I think, maybe I should have stuck it out a few years. But to be honest, I wouldn't be where I'm at today had I not made the choices that I am, right? And
the thing is, with being, I can tell you right now, any professional athlete will tell you, or even college, there's a timeline on it. Yes, you might hit fame and fortune, you might make some money, and you might be able to fulfill. It's almost careful what you wish for. Sure. The amount of athletes that I've seen, and I mentioned a name earlier in the show, and there's people that have really reached the pinnacle of the sport and have had to retire in their mid-30s, maybe late 30s if you're lucky, and even early 40s if you're really lucky. But then there's a real emptiness, and there's a loss. When you talk about purpose as being kind of one of the big drivers for all of us to better ourselves and have that thing, that why that keeps over us. But sport is an interesting one for athletes because they're so purposeful for those limited amount of years that when it's gone, it's amazing the emptiness that they can actually fill. And so as much as I love professional sport, I also understand its shortcomings in terms of what are you going to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It's such a snippet in time. But what I love about you, is you took that competitive mindset, that champion's mindset of turning up and hustling and turning up consistently with intent day after day after day to become one of the world leading, coaches in the world. I mean, that to me, and educating others and giving back to others, and it's not a selfish pursuit the way you went from being all about you to giving to others. I mean, that in itself, I think is one of the great things that you got from all of that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's what's so beautiful about coaching, right? Is that coaching is, I think it's the greatest profession in the world because there's so many different layers to it. Like we speak about, this is not just about teaching somebody how to lift weights. This is about how do I engineer a human being's performance? And that takes a lot. But in order to give that, you have to experience it yourself. And I think being an athlete does help you with that. But you also, need to acquire a lot of experience in order to help guide people to where they want to get to. And the one thing I would say, even though that kind of ended my hockey pursuit from the highest level of competition that I could have attained based on my abilities, I stayed competitive in sport till I was 37. And I played lots of different sports. So I was also a really good baseball player. I played baseball in the summer times. And then I continued to play. I actually continued to play football after hockey. And so I was playing touch football for a lot of years, which was just an absolute amazing sport. That kept me really active in the fall and summer. And then I continued to play hockey afterwards, albeit at a recreational level, but that also opened up opportunities for me to be able to coach hockey. Mm-hmm. And so I had opportunities to coach hockey and to work with bigger organizations like provincial organizations in Saskatchewan. I had an opportunity to work with the SaskCan development program for hockey. And I was always involved in sport. Like I played 14 different sports and events in high school. So I could not get away from it, and it became my life. And so I think having that element of competition and even though I wasn't competing as the athlete anymore, you're right. There's a competition that is involved in even being an athletic therapist and a strength and conditioning professional, that when you're with teams, you are part of that team. Nothing could illustrate that point more than one time when I was in junior hockey as an athletic therapist, we had a bench clearing brawl, and it was full blown coaches fighting coaches and players fighting players. And it was absolutely fantastic. And it was one of those experiences that galvanizes a team more than anything else. You go to battle and literally go to battle in a brawl. So yeah, it was wild.
That's awesome. You know what? It seems to be, and I have to excuse my ignorance when it comes to hockey. Being an Australian, it's kind of like I'm learning now, right? I'm a Boston-based company that I'm working with everybody, and hockey is the channel that so many of our team are building, and I'm surrounded by meeting people that are either hockey players themselves or whatever. But it seems to me it's quite an open game in terms of these brawls are almost a common thing, right? I mean, it's like, is it almost what you do?
No, it's not necessarily as common as it used to be in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That part of the game has really disappeared. It's been kind of frowned upon for some time. But the reality is, in the game of hockey, it is the fastest sport on the planet that is surrounded by a barrier that encourages body contact and encourages forcefully taking somebody off of the puck, and you're skating around with a weapon in your hands or something that could be used as a weapon,
and on your feet,
and you got weapons on your feet. Yeah, like it's not often that you see somebody drop kick somebody, but and I don't think that's ever happened. But the one thing is that violence does beget violence, and so the assertiveness in which the game is played can sometimes manifest into something that's ugly. And there's something that was been known. I played in a really dirty hockey league when I reference I was playing junior. I was playing junior B hockey in Canada in the Capital Junior League, and it was known as a pretty rough league. Like so much so that you had to have a face mask on because the league was tired of dealing with dental bills. So
My goodness.
Yeah. So there was a lot of nasty stuff that happened. But in the game of hockey, there was an unwritten rule, or what was called a code of conduct. And that code of conduct was, listen, if you do anything that is outside the rules and you take advantage of another player, then you have to stand up for yourself, right? And so somebody, if not that player, but a different player might come, and it's time for you to defend yourself. It was just this unwritten rule. And it was one way to the players kind of internally would police the pace of the game, the tempo of the game, so that things wouldn't turn into something really ugly, like breaking a stick over somebody's head, which I had seen a number of times in junior hockey. So it became one of those things that if you organize the fight, it would kind of either set the tempo, change the momentum. It's like, you got a fresh snowfall, that just kind of covered that muddy field, it just kind of, all right, everything's back to normal. And, but that part of the game has really changed now.
I grew up, rugby was our family sport. My brother played professional rugby. And
a hooligan game played by gentlemen.
Exactly. But I felt like as a young man growing up with my hormone changes and everything else going on, that to be in an arena where to hit and push and shove and really let out some of that innate aggression in a controlled place was the best thing for us. And others would say, oh, well, it only, increased you want to fight. And I was like, my mum and dad were all about having us boys on the rugby field to hit and be hit. And I actually think we were better for it. I don't know. I'm not advocating violence, but I think as a teenage young man, I think being in those arenas to be hit and be hit really taught you a lot about yourself and the way to conduct yourself.
100%. I mean, I was always the smallest person anywhere I went. I don't know if you can tell from videos, but I'm only 5'4". So I was playing junior hockey at 5'4", 145 pounds.
Wow.
But I'd fight when I had to, and I wouldn't let anybody push me around. And part of that helped develop who I am, I think, as a person, is that if you want to motivate me, you tell me that I can't do something, right? Or that I'm not big enough, or that there's no way you're going to be able to lift this, or there's no way you're going to be able to take this guy on. And that really did help motivate me. And going back to your part about getting hit, like one of the things that Canada tried doing was making the age higher before they introduced body contact. And when we grew up playing the game, like body contact just happened. Like it was just necessary.
Yeah.
And I think if you introduce that as part of the game, boys start to learn how to control their aggression because they realize that getting hit doesn't actually hurt that much, right? Like when you're younger, like you just bounce, right? And when you're older, then yeah, you're coming with a little bit more force and a little bit more speed. So the difference in the amount of force that you're getting hit with is going to change a lot when you're an adolescent versus when you're a little kid. But you've got all those years to learn how to get hit. And I think that's the one thing about rugby that's so beautiful to watch. And it's one of my favorite sports to watch is seeing these guys that they can have instantaneous bits of aggression when they need to tackle and then get up and swat the other guy in the butt after they've been, whacked really hard, And so they are amazing at knowing how to tackle without getting themselves hurt. The amount of force that they're doing that at is absolutely remarkable. And I wish American football could learn to tackle like rugby does.
Oh, wouldn't it be great if they could even just put their heads in the right position? The amount of times
100%.
I love the NFL.
Body across the person instead of off to the side or straight on. Yeah.
Like in rugby, we learn from a young age where to put your head and where to put your arms and how to tackle. And you just, it becomes in your DNA. You just start to know how to tackle somebody. And I watch the American football, which I love, by the way. I do enjoy it. But these head-to-head contacts and the way that they just throw their bodies into the air and and the guy just has to sidestep them and run around him. It's like, well, you never went around his legs.
That's right.
You got to take down a tall tree. You got to remove his legs. I've grown up in that kind of an all-boy world where we love these physical contact sports. I ended up becoming a professional triathlete, which is about as far removed from that, except for maybe the swim start, as you can get. But, you've grown up with that. When we look at your coaching sort of style, your philosophy, how would you describe that now? How would you describe the way that you coach these days?
Yeah, it really evolved over the 25 years. I think I was probably like most people where they whatever you learned in school, that's what you were going to apply because that's what you were confident in, because an authority gave you that information to run with, right? So you're like, well, it can't be wrong. I learned it in university. And then over the years of having amazing mentors and following educators, I mean, World Health was really great. They would send me off to conferences and I would go and learn from really wonderful people and people who shaped this industry really, and come back and kind of create smaller versions of what they were doing because it was really intense and it was really high level stuff. So I had to try to keep it a little bit more simple for people and then for our coaches and start to expand on it so that we could meet those coaches where they need to be met. So they weren't drinking, learning by drinking through a fire hose. I think the thing that helped me evolve was in just having real good mentors around me and getting involved in the world of education. And so going to conferences and that kind of got things started for me. And I started to really get a taste for teaching and educating and helping coaches that, I could, coach athletes and coach folks that were in pain or coach folks that just wanted to get in better shape. But I started to find that I was getting a real taste for the education part, and I'd get a rush from being at a conference and presenting at a conference or putting on an 8-hour workshop. Like, I can't believe I used to put on 8-hour workshops like every weekend. How exhausting. What it was like to be young again, but I think I might die if I do that now. But, getting around these mentors and one of the things that really changed a big part of my philosophy was like when you think you need to change, but you need some kind of like some insurance and some ways in which other people that have been there before are saying, yeah, you're thinking on the right lines. I give you permission to make that change. I was looking for that. And it happened when I started to become, I was actually thinking of leaving the industry. At one point, I was so burnt out from coaching. I was like, maybe I'd just be better at oil field sales, like something different, because I was just getting so tired of it. And I remember a conversation I had with my wife, and she was like, well, what do you really want to be doing? And I was like, I'd love to spend more time doing more education. She goes, well, who do you know in the industry that could help then? I was like, and I'm going to contact Richard Boyd. Do you know Richard? He's a fellow Australian.
I don't know Richard.
I'm sure you guys know everybody in Australia.
It sounds like I should, though.
Yeah. But Richard started a company called PT on the Net. And it was a really cool resource for personal training and education. And you could type anything into the search engine and articles would come up from Paul Chek and from Michelle Delcourt and all these great people that were in the industry that were just teaching lots of cool stuff. And Gary Gray was another one. I was like, oh man, I got to learn from these guys. And so I had been doing that for a while, and I reached out to Richard and I said, hey, Richard, I'd love to be involved more on PT on the Net. I need something to kind of kickstart my belief and my passion for coaching again. And he's like, well, I just sold PT on the Net. I was like, oh, right. He goes, but Sinner, that was my nickname. He goes, but Sinner, I started a new company called PTA Global, and I'm going to take some of the top people that have contributed to PT on the Net and create a certification for the industry. And it's going to have a huge behavioral focus to it. And that was what I was looking for, because I was getting tired of the whole, it's just about strength and it's just about power and it's just about cardio and it's just about blah, 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 blah. And you can get all this. But I was seeing a massive problem with the fact that us nerds in the industry, so us coaches, we live and breathe this stuff, but the people we're helping don't, right? And so I was like, well, what is it that makes them not be as passionate about this as we are? Like, athletes are the easiest people to train because they're so passionate about their sport and they want to get better. But how do I get those people that don't value this the way I value it? And how do I coach them at a different level? And so that took on learning more about psychology and behavior and how to use, cognitive behavioral therapy and learning all this. And so they created an actual certification based on it. And I was like, okay, I'm in. I want to teach for you. And he goes, well, you got to come to all our mentorships. No problem. Paid a boatload of money to go to all their mentorships, do their teaching school. And I became one of the first 4 faculty in North America for PTA Global.
I love that.
And that changed the way I coach, and my philosophies now has been that.
Oh, I love that. That's so
cool. That was really looking at things from a different perspective, which is okay, psychology governs everything. And that's my belief now, that psychology governs anything and the physiological is layered underneath the psychological. And so that really helped me frame everything that I was going to do, not only from personal training, but also from strength and conditioning. And then it kind of evolved into this idea of, once I started working with more and more youth athletes in an environment where they only play one sport a year round, then it opened up my eyes to all the problems that were happening with single sport athletes and how they're doing too much too soon too often. That made me have to think differently about how we were going to engineer their performance over a long period of time, because they're not getting it at school, they're not getting it in physical education, they're not getting it from the motor skills that they would get in those environments because they're only playing one sport. Like, you take me out and we want to play a game, I'll be able to play it because I played everything and all my day was consumed with was play. So my motor skill system is fairly robust. Whereas you take some kids now, I have parents will bring me a 10-year-old, if you can believe it, Greg, and a 10-year-old tennis player. They can whack the heck out of a ball, but they can't catch it. Right? And so I'm like, this motor system is not in sync with how motor skills are developed. You should be able to catch a ball before you hit a ball. And so that gave me this concept of long-term athletic development, sport engineering, and when strength kind of fits into that. As you know, we're labeled in the strength channel. That's only one of the qualities that we help athletes get. There's a lot of qualities that are required in engineering somebody's performance. So that's kind of how it evolved over a period of time, was moving a little bit further away from the exercise science into psychology and then blending them together into a movement practice. And now I do exercise therapy, I do medical exercise therapy, but they're all still under the umbrella of behavior change.
Oh, that's such a great answer, by the way. And there's a lot to unpack about that, but you've hit a lot of chords that really, as an athlete, the areas that, and a bit like you go through stages of burnout as an athlete. I mean, especially swim, biking, and running for almost 30 years as a profession, you kind of, and then as I stepped away and looked at it, and actually probably the last 10 years of my career, really started focusing more on the CBT training and the way that my brain can affect my physiology, right? And I've had Dr. Tommy Wood on the podcast numerous times, and I'd love to connect you guys. I think I'd love that. He's probably one of the most brilliant men I know, and he's actually on Any Question app. We got to get him to start answering a few more questions, but he's come on my podcast about 3 or 4 times. But he left me with one quote that I use all the time, and it's like, what you think has a direct impact on your physiology, right? And it's very simple. It's an easy quote, and we all talk about visualizing and negative thoughts and positive thoughts and all these things, but they have the science, and he's always giving me different research papers that the science has just proven how this works. And going between cognitive behavior or cognitive function, training the brain, then the impact of that on the physical body, and training the physical body and the impact of that on the brain. We did an episode just this last week actually that just came out, and it was all about that. And it's almost getting to the point, if you want to be in nutrition or dietitian, you better understand psychology. If you want to be in anything to do with movement, and I love how you put it, engineering performance. I think that's fantastic. Engineering performance. You need to understand how brain function works and how people learn and how that brain can affect performance. So have you been, with that, have you been continually experimenting with ways to help improve that for people, like whether it be visualizing or affirmations or how people think?
In my undergrad, I had a professor of our sports psychology. His name was Dr. John Hogg. He wrote a book called Mental Skills for Swim Coaches. And he was the Canadian national swim team. And at the time, I was doing my massage therapy certificates under the swim team's massage therapist. I came up with this idea of, hey, how cool would it be if we were able to teach massage therapists these mental skills that you're teaching us.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that you can incorporate mental skills with massage at the same time. So you would blend, effleurage with relaxation mental skills, right? So you're giving suggestions or things that the athlete might be thinking about during a relaxation.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Heart massage, right? Versus I'm going to give you imagery during a time where I'm doing a pre-event massage, right? So I'm, doing more petrissage and I'm jostling and trying to get you fired up and stimulate the sympathetic nervous system at the same time I'm giving you imagery skills. So that was like my little idea. And then he took the idea and gave it to his master's student. I was like, I'm a lowly undergrad. Like, why'd you give him my idea? Anyways, it made me think differently about mental skills at that point in time when I had that idea. And I've been carrying that through my coaching for quite some time. And I always start with the first step that's in his book, and that's self-awareness. I think that's the first mental skill any athlete should really start to work on, especially as a kid, because from the time you start to figure out what your identity is in terms of who am I, what things are important to me, do I have my own values, are they different from my parents? There's a massive change that happens there, even into young adulthood, right? And as we evolve as an athlete, you get more and more experiences, which may change your interpretation of who I am. And is what I thought I was really how I behave on the court, field, or pitch, right? What we started looking at and what I started to examine was this idea of, why are we coaching everybody to do the exact same thing from a motor skill perspective when that may or may not identify with who they are as a player, right? And so to give you an example, like if you want to become a better skater, you go to a power skating class, but that power skating instructor is teaching you one way to skate, and that might not be your style of skating. I was conflicted with this idea of motor skill education and coaching where we're teaching one style of doing something, but we do know that motor skills are best enhanced when we leave kids to just figure it out on their own. Free play, right? And so you learn how to run, you learn how to, in our case in Canada, you learn how to skate being out on the pond or out on the outdoor rink, just playing around. And then that becomes your style, and you make yourself more proficient at it, but you have a style of play, right? And that usually coincides with the tactics and the strategies that you learn within your style of play and what makes you a good player. And then great teams are made up of a variety. You hear me talk about variability all the time on the app, because I think that's probably the most important thing we can teach for people, is that this idea of, if I'm going to build a good team, I need a variety of different skill sets and different thinkers on that team in order to be successful. We might have the same mantra and we might have the same goals, but what makes you a successful individual is that we are customizing a movement experience that matches not only your motor skill capability, but also how do you perceive yourself when you're doing these things. Because if I can perceive myself, then now I can tap into a layer of motor skill that's different. Because games are played by accomplishing a task, not by how I do the task. But we coach people on how they do the task, not can you get the task done more efficiently and more economically. And that's where the conflict started for me, was listening to kids coming back from a batting practice saying, well, I'm changing my swing. I'm like, wait a minute, how many swings have you done in your lifetime at this point? And they're like, I don't know, thousands. I'm like, you know how hard it is to change your swing now? Right? Like, is it going to help you hit the ball better? And they go, well, I'll probably hit it. I might hit it harder. I'm like, well, what difference does it make if you're going to hit it right to the other player? The task of the game is to hit the ball where they're not. So the more I change, get you to try to hit it in a certain way, the more you now have to change, and you're now starting to think about the technique instead of the outcome. And that's not how we play sport.
Gee, this is music. I've got all these bunch of notes, the things I want to talk to you about, and I've just totally gotten rid of it because honestly, listening to you speak is just really resonating with me. And I had a career where I swam a certain way, wide left arm, lifted my head. I learned to swim in the ocean, in the surf. I never learned to swim in the pool. I never went to a pool until I was probably about 20. Every swim coach in the world would always try and change my stroke. it's not efficient enough. It's not efficient enough. And I'd work on it for a little bit, while I was with that coach for a few sessions. And then I'd just go back to what I had learned, right? And it was like the free play that I'd learned by swimming in the ocean and catching waves. And it was the only way I became a better swimmer was actually by just watching the greatest open water swimmers in the world and then visualizing them as I was doing my activity. So I was playing, but I could see Kai Hurst, who's been on the show, and others in my head, and my body position would be stronger. And I get strong and fit in that position because I was excited to do it. But if you had me doing drills all day and trying to upskill and I'm talking about, I'm in my 20s and early 30s now. I'm not going back. I've done tens of thousands of hours of swimming. I just wanted to let me play and let me go. And it worked for me, right? It worked for me. I was a front pack swimmer and it worked. Every time I tried to go back to what a swimming coach would suggest, I was focused on that and I couldn't even get my breathing right. And I could be buggered by the time I get to the 50 meters. I'm not saying people when they're young not get some great upskilled coaching, but it's almost like once you've got tens of thousands of hours in you, it becomes very difficult to go retrain that.
I mean, the question I would ask you is that, did you get faster, right? Because if you're in a race, if your times are better and your splits are better getting out of that water and you had more energy and it had a good transfer to the bike, then that would be the thing that we measure it against, right?
Yeah.
So I'm always measuring things based on, am I faster or am I slower? If we're in a race sport, right? So if I have to give you something that actually slows you down, how much time and effort is it going to have to take me as the coach? And is that risk reward ratio appropriate for this individual?
Exactly.
Right? So that's a thing that we always have to evaluate.
For me, I always looked back and mine became fairly simplistic in the sense that my swimming improved when my running fitness really went through the roof, right? Heart and lungs don't really know any difference. They start shunting blood to the right places. And, I get my running to be really on point. And then I could basically, I could sprint for 1,500 meters without getting tired. That was always the goal, just not slowing down. I don't have to be the fastest 50 or 100 meter swimmer. I just have to be the one that holds on to it longer. Same with running. I don't have to be the fastest 1K runner. I just have to back 10 of them. And so it became about conditioning. But in saying all of that, I think what I'm enjoying listening to you is understanding, first and foremost, free play. I love that the kids for sure should be out there and just learning everything they can just through play. Monitoring the amount of skill set coaching we give them and giving them micro doses of that throughout their sort of growth cycles, if you think in their early teens and late teens. Variety of sport, I think, is fantastic. And understanding the impact of having fun while you're doing it, understanding the mental side and how that can impact your physical side. Yeah,
I think those are some massive bullet points that I think we as coaches really need to anchor to. I think we get caught in the minutia of, is your bench press better? Is your squat better? Is your power clean better? I mean, those are all things that are measurable, but to me don't play as big of an impact as, can I make you more efficient and effective first and foremost? Can I do it in a way that I'm not interfering with that development from happening? Sometimes we as coaches, we tend to talk too much. And, I've been asked by parents, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you changing this or changing that? I'm like, the cue that I give is going to matter to them when I do speak. If I keep talking nonstop and telling them what they're doing, they don't know what the sartorius muscle is or what the function of the abductor pollicis longus is. Like that, I would never talk like that. But if I start talking muscles, these kids aren't going to know what they're talking about, and you don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So the most important thing is, are they moving with good rhythm and timing, coordination, and symmetry? And they're doing it in a style that makes them look like, hey, I got that actually felt really easy for me. Great, then you did it right. And
doing it in a way that, I'm telling you, for me, it was always had to be fun, right? And it had to add to my passion to what I was doing, not detract from it. And, my wife and I were both very different athletes. We both got to world number one for a while. We both went to Olympics and all that kind of thing. But the way she learned was very different to me. But, you know, we talk about and how much fun she always had with her swim club growing up. More than her high school friends, it was the club and the coaching and the environment they created was a place where the kids wanted to be. And so she wanted to go swimming, and she was passionate about swimming because of the environment the coach created. And, you know, for me, the sport was always just fun, hanging out with my mates. Yes, I was competitive and I loved to push myself and test myself. I remember having a coach by the name of Brett Sutton, and he's known in our sport as being one of the real tough coaches. He's got a bunch of world champions and everything. But the work I did with him for 4 years was really brutal, and I was pretty burnt out by the end of it. And so I moved to Victoria, Canada, up your neck of the woods almost, and moved with the squad there with Coach Lance Watson and Simon Whitfield, who was my good mate who invited me up. And suddenly I remember being in a workout and everybody was laughing between sets and having a good time. And I hadn't had that kind of a laugh or a good time for 4 years, for me to be in work.
Wow.
And I was like, this is what I've been missing. That's the magic dose. I grew up with that as a teenager in my early 20s. It was always fun and laughter. And then I got really serious for 4 years because now I was a professional athlete. And I was like, And then my performances really started to go through the roof. That was a big transition for me of go back to why you're doing it. And is it fun? And is the environment adding to that passion, or is it detracting from that passion? So I really feel like you're somebody that gets that, and that's huge. That's huge for anybody.
Did you second guess yourself while you're in the pool and everyone's like, some people would call that like goofing off? Like, did you go like, are these guys even serious? Like, what are they doing here? Or did it immediately connect with you?
I think there's two parts to it. One, I felt empowered because I was the serious athlete I was kind of like the slightly older, and I was the more mature, and I had a few results on the board, and I thought I took a little bit of, and this is a bit of arrogance, I guess. I took it as like, okay, well, they're laughing and goofing off and having fun. But then I realized, hang on, I'm being too uptight and too serious, and I'm not enjoying what I was about to retire. And I was like, well, hang on, you're trying to go this macho man, terrible way of putting it, I'm back in the 70s, aren't I? Macho man type mentality, but to going, hey, why can't you have fun? And so for me, it was a process of swapping that over and embracing that culture more and having it come into me. And then, don't get me wrong, I still brought the hard work mentality, but it was nice to be able to just laugh and have a more relaxed environment. And all of a sudden, almost like that sympathetic nervous system had been on all the time.
Sure.
And the parasympathetic was able to kick in, and then I found that nicer balance and I was able to perform at a higher level. So,
Well, it shows you how environment dictates behavior, right?
Huge.
And then, so if we don't cultivate the environment and cultivate the culture that matches that person's, values, then we're going to have a challenge, right? I mean, there's going to be people that we run into that are very serious, very driven. This is how I want to do things. It needs to be very analytical. And I mean, we got to cultivate that environment for that person.
Of course. I think, we've discussed on this show with numerous people, is data a good thing? How much data should people be collecting? Especially endurance sports, everybody's got some kind of data measuring tool. They're measuring sleep, they're measuring food, they're measuring power on the bike, they're measuring pace and distance. And for some, if you're an engineer type mindset, having all of that data really works for you. For someone like me, who tends to be driven more with passion and emotion, and I look at it as a negative. I don't need to be told I had a bad night's sleep. I don't need that reinforcement. I like to just, and so, yes, understanding who you're working with, fantastic. Hey, mate, I want to wrap up the show with asking you a few final questions, if I may. And this is one of my favorite questions because, we kind of touched on it earlier, but, what would you tell your 18-year-old self back then when you were trying to be a pro hockey player? I'm fascinated on this one.
Jesus, such a tough question because I don't know if I look back too much and ask, what would I have done different or make sure you do this instead of this? But I think the first thing I probably would have said, just live in the moment. And the reason for that is like I would tend to try to get too far ahead of myself. But a really good piece of advice I got was doors are going to open for you. You just have to make sure that you're ready and willing to walk through them. And so do that. Don't think about it too much because there's another door with a completely different experience on the other side of that door that you're going to walk into and be excited about that opportunity. And I think I've always done that. Like doors have opened, I've walked through, I didn't have to kick down a door. A door was opened for me and I made the best of it. And I was able to do that and cultivate a pretty good career out of, creating my own jobs for myself. I never applied for a job that I got. I created those jobs. And so that was pretty cool experience. So I would say, yeah, doors are going to open, be ready and willing to walk through them.
I love that. I was brought up, as basically say yes to every opportunity. Not necessarily every opportunity, but you get it. Like be prepared, be ready, be listening, be aware of opportunities, I think is almost it, and be ready to walk through them. That's really cool.
I mean, that's how I got the Ritz Carlton wellness thing.
Yeah.
Becoming the consultant for that organization was just, hey, this is what I think you guys could do to actually build a really cool experience on your yachts. And they're like, let's do it.
I hope they're kicking in some trips for you on those yachts. Do you get to go on those yachts?
Yeah, we'll be traveling here this in 2023 or 2024.
Okay, next question. Who would you want to have a dinner with? Let's pick 3 people if you can think of 3. Non-family, and they can be living or dead.
Okay, well, first one without a doubt would be Wayne Gretzky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's always been my hero.
Well, you wouldn't be Canadian if you didn't pick Wayne Gretzky.
Right? I mean, you look around my house, everything has something to do with Wayne. So I was just at the hockey game the other night and he was there and I almost went into like absolute shock because I was like, wait a minute, I can see him and I'm now starting to tremble because like that's my hero's just within a baseball throw away and like, how do I not go tackle him? And I think if I ever got put in front of him, I'd be like, would you be my dad? Because he was like my idol growing up, right? So that would be one. And then, I'd probably pick a musician for sure. Maybe someone like John Bonham, legendary drummer for Led Zeppelin, just to see how successful he got at such a young age, and how it was just drums were just a part of him. And then probably Marilyn Monroe. That would just be, I mean, what would be better than sitting across the room from that beautiful lady and learning about all the stories that went on in her life. And
what really happened, right?
What really happened, yeah.
Wow, I love that 3, mate. And I think the first 2, we got to see if we can get on the app and create this community where you're actually just rubbing shoulders with these guys.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Actually, I just brought on a good friend of mine, Bill Gerber. He's one of Hollywood's biggest movie producers and he's good friends with Clint Eastwood and Arnie and everybody else. But he was also in the music industry throughout the 80s and was the manager for bands like The Cars and many others. So I feel like we're kind of almost 1 degree away from...
That's right.
From John Bonham.
Amazing stories.
So I love those 3, mate. I'm happy to be the guy that waits on the table there. Okay, final question here is... Where do you see yourself in 3 years from now?
Well, hopefully our dream is to spend our summers in Saskatchewan, in Canada. So our goal is to, have the flexibility to live in Florida for 9 months of the year and 3 months back in Canada so I can reconnect with family. So
that's awesome.
In the next 3 years, our goal is really to evolve my business so that I can be a remote worker, right? So somebody who can coach in a variety of different ways. So that'd be the big thing. I have a company called 7 Movements. So we're kind of organizing that company to get to the point where we're doing a lot of research for disease states, and we want to build that company up and eventually, hopefully, be able to sell that technology and that company to release it to the rest of the world. So 3 years will probably be too soon for that, but it's one of our big dreams is to change our philosophy on microdosing movement and try to drive that into the world so that people can access information and help deliver movement to people in disease states and people in chronic pain and things like that, and give them access to things that they can start to use to create self-care so they don't have to rely on the medical systems.
Wow.
So that's kind of my big dream. And it's 3 years, it won't be ready by then, but we're building the technology for it right now. And we're doing research with UBC, University of British Columbia, McMaster University for cancer at the moment with some of the protocols that I wrote. So hopefully moving into diabetes and Parkinson's disease are our next 2 programs that I'm building out.
Wow. And so when you say microdosing movements, it's kind of helping people that are, obviously in a state where doing movement is a challenge, and you're trying to find new...
You got it. Like only about 20%. The fitness industry really only kind of helps or attracts people who are already fit, right? But we don't really have many things for the people that don't have access. And I don't mean like the ability to go do it. They just don't have the information, and the infrastructure that we build is not for people that can't exercise or need smaller doses of it. So we built this concept like 13 years ago about how could I deliver a smaller dose of exercise more frequently throughout the day to help people that would have special considerations or risks or things that they can't get access to. Because when you go to a gym, you're going to be handed the same thing everybody else does. So how can we reach those people so that we can actually make a dramatic impact on some of the world's biggest diseases that could be affected from exercise? So that's kind of like our mission and where we want to go with it.
Wow. Where can people find out more about that now?
That one's at 7movements.com, www.7movements.com, like all.
Okay.
SEVEN.
Perfect. I'll put that in the show notes. But it takes me back, when you think of these microdosing movement, the amount of research that's coming out, and if you can move every hour for 5 minutes or whatever is better than doing sort of 1 hour straight in the morning. But if you can do that, move just a little bit throughout the day, how the benefits of it.
Our partners at the UBC, Dr. Jonathan Little, and at McMaster University, Dr. Martin Gabala, they're partners with us, and they're like the 2 of the most world leaders in this type of research. So we're very lucky to have them as part of our team, and for us to be part of their team in constructing a mechanism that allows people that we can reach those people through research that they're doing at their home. So we're measuring the effectiveness of not only just the dosages that we're prescribing, but also the effects that they have from a behavioral standpoint. So Dr. Little's colleague, Dr. Mary Jung, she's one of the foremost leading world researchers in exercise behavior. And so we're trying to connect those 2 things together so that we can make a meaningful impact on not only people getting through this research study, but continuing this for the rest of their life and gleaning as much information as we can so that the next programs that we start putting together are actually making some meaningful change and targeting the 80% of the people that don't exercise that really need it.
Oh, mate, what a fantastic mission. Yeah. Well, I hope at any question we can kind of help with that, whether that's helping just with the brand building or if it's just getting the information out or helping you create content that we can put in there or whatever, because I think it's fantastic, mate. And you're one of the most qualified people I've met and had on the show in terms of understanding the brain and how it can connect, and the behavior, how it connects with the physiology. So, and mate, I just really appreciate your time. What's next for you coming up here?
I don't have any real big things happening from a coaching standpoint. I've got a couple athletes that I'm working with right now, trying to get them recovered from injury and getting back onto the circuit. And the rest is just building out a lot of the stuff that we're doing with 7 Movements and kind of programming it all and organizing it and delivering it into the formats that we're looking for from that. So Other than that, I'm hanging out in my garage, training some young athletes, and get to hang out in my short pants all day long and sweat my ass off in my garage.
I know Florida here does get a little warm at times. I went to do a Thanksgiving 5K as everybody in the team said, yeah, okay, we'll do a virtual 5K. And they're all up in Boston running in sort of 20 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 3 or 4 Celsius. And I was down here in 80 degrees and unbelievable humidity. I was like, almost died. I mean, I wouldn't change it, especially with having a 2 and a 4-year-old who don't like to wear clothes. It is really a great part of the world to be in. But mate, I got to tell you, I just really appreciate you coming on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I feel like you and I share a lot of commonalities with the way we approach movement and the brain and how it all connects. So I really just appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey and all your knowledge, mate. It's been wonderful.
Oh, thanks so much. And well, let's do the next time we get together, let's do it in person.
Let's do it in person.
With a Belgian beer.
Oh, with a Belgian, yes. Everybody understand. The pre-show, we were talking all about our favorite Belgian beers and how we're trying to moderate the dosage. I love it, mate. Well, I appreciate you coming on again. So thank you. And thanks everybody for listening and sharing the show and all your feedback. I truly appreciate it. And you can find the show notes and timestamps and everything else at bennettendurance.com/media.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you enjoyed the show, your support would truly be appreciated. You can visit the Patreon page, or you can subscribe with your podcast app of choice. Don't miss the next episode, so subscribe and be notified. For show notes, if you want to know more, please visit benettendurance.com. I'm Phil Liggett, and on behalf of Greg Bennett, here's to the next time, and I hope you will join Greg again very soon.